Thank you very much, Diana. That was such a lovely, warm introduction. Yes, I also want to thank the team for all the talks that we've been having. Really, I'm sort of drawing from all the talks, and if you haven't heard them all, they're all on YouTube. So I kind of do go back home and listen to some if you've missed some. But yeah, I'm really just drawing from what's already been shared. And sort of giving a bit of an overview, really, of the life of the Buddha and, as Diana said, its end. And Sanghavacharya, one of the things he said is that you can only really evaluate a life, how it's been, what it's meant, as it were, at the end of somebody's life. You see that in obituaries, don't you? You sort of like, they're kind of doing a kind of, what did this life mean? And I think it's the reason why you have to look at it from the perspective of the end is partly because anything can happen at any time in someone's life. You might start off, with really great conditions and everything's going sort of well, and then, hit a crisis in the middle and then have to make sense of that. So, things change. There's a lot of change in a person's life. Also because, when I like reading obituaries and things, and often sometimes you think that somebody's really achieved a lot externally and you think, wow, they did this, they did that, and wow. But then you'll find out at the end that, actually, they had really difficult, personal relationships, for example, or they were lonely. And it's something that you wouldn't necessarily see from the outside. Or vice versa. Somebody may not have done very much, as it were, or achieved externally, but you'll find out at a funeral or something of how much they meant to so many people. So it is at the end that you often see what somebody's life has really been like. So in my meditation this morning, I was remembering a friend who died this year. We had his funeral in January at the London Buddhist Centre. And he got involved in the Dharma quite late in his life, and really just threw himself into practice, into the community. He didn't live or work at the centre. He didn't teach particularly, I don't think, very much at the centre. But what he did do is that he shared himself as much as he could. He's very fully with others. He was a great friend to people, basically. His name was Dayabandhu, which actually means kindly friend, kindly brother. And it was lovely hearing at his funeral all the people who talked about how he befriended them. He'd literally see somebody at the centre, think they looked all right or like the look of them, and actually go out and make friends with them. And he did that with me. And he was an artist and is a collector of art as well. And one of the things he did, he basically would take people, once he got to know somebody, he'd invite them to various galleries and, exhibitions, and he just shared his passion, and they would see the art through his eyes. He was a great walker, so he would actually, he'd meet somebody somewhere, but then they'd walk like a long way to an art gallery. So he combined his love of London, with walking, with the arts, and people began to experience, London and the arts and everything in a quite different way through him. He was very generous, so he would give some of his art to people. In fact, in his will, there was so many people that had been bequeathed some of his artwork. And he was also quite mischievous. He had a sense of fun and mischief. One of the things he liked to do, apparently later on in his life, he really loved working out at the gym. But he loved to do that because he wanted to go clubbing. He wanted to look really good. So he'd go clubbing early hours of the morning. I don't know what kind of clubs or anything like that. But anyway, it was one of his things that he liked to do. And people at his funeral, his family and friends from the past were really moved by, how big his life seemed to be, how much he was sort of almost like fully expressed from the person they'd known. He'd become bigger, and he'd impacted quite a number of people just through being himself. He was. And they also really appreciate the fact that he was well loved. And you could really feel that. In fact, Aditya Bandhu actually helped organise his funeral, and Diane has been involved as well. So you could feel like actually that the centre loved him, his friends loved him, he loved others, and that's really, what marked his end. It made me think of the Raymond Carver poem that we had, that I shared in the early part of the retreat, which says something like, and he was an artist and he was having a conversation with his partner towards the end of his life. He was dying of cancer. And he goes something like this: "And did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so, I did. And what was that? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on this earth." So that was one of the first poems that I personally really connected with, and it expressed some of the reasons why I had started meditating, I had started practicing, and I just sort of took that to my heart, and I thought, okay, that's something I can remember as to why I'm doing this, why I'm embarking on this journey. And I've always, I like listening to stories, I love listening to people's life stories, I love reading spiritual autobiographies. And partly, because I see, we learn from others, I learn from people's lives. I like to see what's common, like in their lives with mine. I also like to see what's different. I like to see what difference they made in the world. But through all the kind of biographies and life stories, I began to see, well, there definitely is a pattern that we all sort of share as human beings, like this essential structure that we all have. And really, it's basically, we have this kind of body, we have this kind of mind, heart, we have the ability to communicate as humans, and then we have this potential for growth, and for deep awareness, for love, which can arise just from the experience of being human. If deep awareness and love emerges, in a way, it makes sense of what it is to be human. It makes sense of what it is to be alive. So I find myself, in a way, my ultimate spiritual autobiography or biography that I love is, of course, the life of the Buddha. I sort of go back to it again and again. I don't think I will ever get tired. I've not, at least at this point in my life, it's still giving me a lot of inspiration. And I think it's because it's like the ultimate spiritual biography, because the pattern and the potential is fully expressed, it's fully realized, it's complete. Everything in his life, from the beginning right to the end, has this great meaning. He's realized fully the potential, he's made sense of what it is to be alive. So, yeah, it's a story I'm always learning from. And I look back at certain situations in my life where, things have happened and an aspect of the Buddha story just lands. And I'm like, okay, this is what I've got to do. This is what's actually happening in my experience. And one example of that was when, I had a period where I was working quite hard. I'd set up a not-for-profit, and it was going very well. There was a big community involved. We were making a difference in the area we're working with. But it was a lot of work, and I wasn't getting the time, really, to really nourish my spiritual practice in the way that I really wanted to and needed. So I found myself basically burnt out, really, and sort of suffering from some sickness. And I was sitting in meditation one day and feeling quite sorry for myself, sort of licking my wounds, as it were, like, what happened? How did this happen? I was doing good. I was, making a difference. I was helping others. And how comes I've ended up like this? And at that point in the meditation, I had this image of a man lying on the ground, exhausted. And I was like, oh, that's Siddhartha. That's the Buddha. And I realized, he had gone through, I wouldn't have necessarily thought of it like that at the time, but I thought, it's similar. It's a similar experience, in a sense. he obviously had gone on this ascetic journey, feeling that actually if he had control over his mind, if he was able to kind of subdue the body, then he'd achieve liberation, he'd free himself. And he collapses on the ground after years. Actually, after doing this really well, he had a whole following. People thought it was amazing. He was getting lots of accolades, well done, keep going. And his body gave up. So he finds himself on the ground, collapsed. I imagine, now the text doesn't necessarily say this, but I'm thinking, wow, that must have been a massive shock to him to have left home, done all of this work so far, had these amazing teachers, been making a huge amount of progress, feeling maybe that enlightenment wasn't that far away, and then finding himself, gosh, I've just wasted all of this time. It hasn't worked. I've made a mistake. I've taken a wrong turn. That must have been, shocking, maybe even humiliating. And the text doesn't say that he was humiliated, but I know I was putting myself in his shoes and I thought I would have been humiliated. I would have felt really like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing? And what am I encouraging others to do as well? But it's interesting because so you got there in that scene, you've got the sort of problem, as it were, you've got the challenge. He's taken a wrong turn. It hasn't resulted in change and in growth, at least from what his experience is at that time. And but the story doesn't end there, of course. So for me, when I sort of that image came to my mind, I was like, I sort of started crying. But this time it wasn't tears of, self-pity. It was just tears of recognition. It was like, oh, okay, I'm not alone in this. It's something that maybe many people do. The term being burnt out, exhausted is a common one. It's something that many people do. Maybe it's something that we just find ourselves not knowing how to live in a balanced way, not knowing how to look after ourselves, really, how to give and look after ourselves at the same time. Maybe it's a very human problem. It's just that the Buddha did it to an extreme, as it were. So I really found some comfort in that, actually. And, so the tears were one of, like, recognition. It was one of release. It was one of sadness, but also like, okay, I'm going to learn from this. I can learn from this. Because, of course, afterwards, after he's collapsed, you have, he gets given rice milk by the shepherd girl that comes along. And he takes the rice milk and he gradually restores himself. So I sort of knew what to do. Just from that, I thought, I've got to look after my body. I've got to nourish myself. I've got to receive support. I've got to be open to receive support. Maybe I ask for help. It might take a bit of time, but actually the body can restore itself. It can heal itself. And I have to learn to live. What does it mean to live in balance? What does it mean to be able to give to others and to oneself at the same time? And I knew it was something I had to learn. I also knew I had to learn to, even to enjoy positive pleasures more, because there was to counteract almost the sort of striving side of my character, the sort of perhaps willful side of my character. I thought, okay, I've just got to learn to be more present, enjoy positive pleasures, and have more fun in my life. So that really worked. That's what I took away. I'm not saying the Buddha thought have more fun, but I took that away for myself. So what I liked about that, the Buddha's story and the seeking aspect of his journey, is that it really presents the problems, if you like, the challenges of the search that we're on. It really presents them very, very clearly, because of course we're all seeking. We're all looking for something. We all want something. What the Buddha started off, Siddhartha, what he started off with was a real clarity about what he wanted. Because often we want something and we go on this search, but we're not always conscious of it. We're not always clear about why we're wanting what we want. And we're not always sure it's actually going to be beneficial in the end. But Siddhartha, his search, this stage of his life, this seeking stage of his life, is one of, I have this question, how to overcome suffering, how to overcome old age, sickness and death. Not just for myself, but for others as well. So then when he meets these challenges, like, the ascetic challenge, he wasn't confused really about what he had to do. He had to pick himself up and thought, okay, this isn't it. It's literally like we've been doing in Qigong, dusting oneself off, picking himself, going, okay, this is the goal I'm moving towards. So really, I have to adjust. I have to sort of reorientate myself and really figure out what next. And of course, in his story, he did have an experience of pleasure. He had a meditation where he remembered what it was like to be a child watching his father plough, and he had that image of just being deeply relaxed and it being a very natural experience, and that was what showed him the way. So yes, in a life well lived, there is a conscious search. There is a conscious seeking for purpose, for meaning. The more the search, it encapsulates or encompasses other people, other human experience, a range of human experience, the more sort of beneficial, the more universal, the more significant that search will be. So the other thing I liked about Siddhartha's and the Buddha's story was, yes, it was this very clear search with a very clear question that was a universal question, but I also liked the fact that he was successful at this journey. Like, the search did come to an end, he achieved what he wanted to achieve. And I don't think I grew up with images of people and stories of people that were very noble, like Martin Luther King, for example. He was a great inspiration for me growing up. But, his life ended the way it ended. That always made me sad. I thought, he had this noble quest to bring people together from all races, to unite America and the world, and it ended in violence. So that always made me sad, that end. So for me, I think it meant that I was like, well, I want to go on a search. I want to have a meaningful search, but I didn't want to suffer overly from the search. I just thought, I want to feel like I can have joy in this search somehow or other. So meeting the Buddha's life and the fact that Buddha was successful in his search was a great revelation. It's like, you can live a life of meaning, you can live a life of purpose, you can live a life that makes a huge difference to countless beings and be well and be happy and be free. And for me, it's like, it gave me the confidence that I needed at that point to go, I can do this then, I can follow this journey. It's a bit like, even being on this retreat, we had our hopes and our fears, particularly our hopes at the beginning of what we wanted at the outcome of this retreat. But you also want to enjoy the process of it. You might get the outcome of peace, but you want each day for there to be something that kind of lifts you up, whether it's a sunset or a lovely moon or a good dinner or a good chat or a walk or something like that. It's like the process in itself needs to feel nourishing, have some enjoyment, and that gives you the fuel to keep going. So for me, yes, being the Buddha's, the two aspects of his life, the search, the clarity of it, the fact that it was all-encompassing in terms of human experience, the fact that he realised his goal was two really significant aspects for me. And then I think the other thing is that once he realised his goal, you really see a different part of the Buddha story, because whilst he's still searching, he's very concerned, he's working on his mind, he's working on his heart, he's trying out the various different methods, different teachers, he's really working on himself, kind of like we are. We're working on ourselves. Once he attains enlightenment, basically from then on, it's an outpouring. It's an outpouring towards others. He's benefiting as many people as possible in his 45 years. And, for me, again, a life well lived is one where there's benefit to others. You share the fruits of whatever you've seen, whatever you've succeeded at, or you're succeeding in. You're sharing those fruits with others. And it's amazing for me, his story, that the amount of different people he comes across. He manages to communicate the Dharma in so many different ways, through images and stories and symbols, all different kinds of characters and people. You see the Buddha, giving very clear instructions, but you also see him being silent when somebody asks him a question. You see him really enjoying people, enjoying situations. You see him changing his mind about things sometimes as well. You see him, with his critics and how he manages those communications. So you see him in such a range of different, experiences, including one or two characters who take attempts on his life. You just see him having the whole range of human experience. And you see what the range of human communication can be, what the potential of human communication can be, because he responds so skillfully, so clearly in all those situations, so lovingly as well in all those situations. So one of the stories I like is when there's a monk who's sick, and he's in his hut, and the Buddha and his attendant Ananda go over to the monk. And the Buddha says, well, what's happened? He says, well, I'm sick. I've got dysentery. And he says, well, who's looking after you? Who are you sharing with? Who are you looking after? And he said, no one's looking after me. I'm basically useless to everybody. I have no value right now. So they've gone off. And it's the Buddha and the attendant who then washes the monk, gives him clean clothes, looks after him. And then, of course, the Buddha goes to the monks and inquires, what's going on? Why? How can you not care for your brother, as it were? So that's a really human Buddha. That's a Buddha who basically, in that situation, was teaching through his care for others. Teaching, and that's why the stories come down to us, because it shows that in a very intimate situation like that, the Buddha knew how to respond, knew how to care. So that also brought up for me that actually, what you do privately and what you do, with your intimate, close friends, and what you do publicly, in the Buddha's life, it's all one and the same. There's not that distinction. And again, I think in our lives it can be split. We can be amazing at home and not so great to our colleagues, and vice versa. For me, what I see in the Buddha story is that everybody matters, whether they're a stranger in the street, whether they're a close friend, whether they are a great disciple. They all matter. And that's because he saw the profound interdependence of all things. It wasn't a forced thing. He just naturally saw that we're not separate in the way that we think we are. And so if that's the case, every life matters. Every life has value. So if that's the case, then how does a great life like that end? What does it look like? For me, it was like this great force. The Buddha was like this great force, like the sun. What happens when its time's over? So this question for me was really important, because I started practicing the Dharma because I found myself in a crucial situation when I was younger, on a plane, and it felt like the plane was going to crash. And that wasn't just me. We were all on board. We all got scared, nervous. We were coming back from the Philippines, and it's quite a Catholic country. So when the plane was dropping lots of feet, and the air staff started sort of shouting at us and looking stressed themselves, we all began to freak out. And so the rosaries came out, people started praying, some people shouting, some people just like didn't want to know, like just, close their eyes and ears and just didn't want to have the experience at all. It was a range. I looked around the plane and there was just a range of such different responses, but we were all pretty terrified. I was terrified. I just was like, I'm way too young to die. I haven't even started my life. And I didn't know what to do with the fear. I felt completely defenseless. And I saw everybody praying, and I just thought, do I do that? But then I was like, Suryagupta, you can't start asking for God now when you... I can't quite do that. Like, God, that thing that happened between us. Can you come back? I kind of need you. But I can't do that. So what was I going to do? I didn't have any beads with me. I didn't have any mantras. No one was taking any notice of me. Either everybody was in their world, in their fear. So. At that point, I could feel my whole body completely tense. And I just felt quite like I was going to be sick or something like that. So at that point, I just turned out and looked out the window. And it was a very fortuitous thing that I did, because outside of the window, I saw what was and still is the most amazing sky I'd ever seen. It was quite unearthly. It had all these different colours, oranges and yellows and reds, and then it had purples and indigo and then black, and then this great star in the middle, and it just felt like it was communicating to me. And I just spent, I don't even know how long looking at this sky. And the next thing I knew, at some point my attention wandered back to the plane. We were still dropping, lots of feet. People still had their rosaries and crying out for God. But I noticed the fear in my body had gone. And at first I thought, where's it gone? The situation was still the same. But fear was no longer in my experience. And at that point, I had this clear mind. So my body was calm, my mind was clear. And out of that experience emerged a question. Out of that clear mind, there was a question. And the question was, how do I live so that when I die, I can die without regret? And how do I love? I knew love had something to do with the answer to that question. And I promised myself that if the plane landed, I would go in search of the answer. I would start a search. I was telling this story sometime in January on an online retreat, and then one of the team members came and said, Suryagupta, everybody wants to know in the chat, what happened next? I said, what do you mean what happened next? They're like, well, what did you do? What happened next? I said, well, I don't know. The plane landed. It was at Heathrow. It was raining. I got on the central line, I got home, and what do you want to know? And I realised afterwards, I thought, oh, okay, yeah, I haven't, there's a bit of the story that's missed. And because actually, what I do know, because I said that to myself, it was a promise, even a vow that I made at that point. But there was a bit of the back of my mind that said, are you really going to do this? Are you really going to go on this search? Maybe other things will happen. But actually what happened was when I got back, I got ill, actually. And then doctors didn't know what was going on with me. So I had another experience of, I guess, impermanence or the frailty of human existence. So that was really, that's a whole story as well, but that really was in the end the kind of one of the catalysts. But still, even then, I was looking around. It was days before the internet, so I didn't know where to go. I didn't know I was looking for Buddhism. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just wanted to know somebody who was wiser than I was and knew how to live life well. And it was completely by chance that I was talking to somebody one day at the library, and I was telling them about my frustrations in communicating myself because no one was interested in the experiences I'd been having. They were like, just get over it, get on with life. That was their thing. And as I was saying this, somebody put a leaflet down at the table I was standing near, which said Creative Communication Workshop at the Buddhist Centre. And I picked it up and I went along. So so that question, how do I live so when I die I can die without regret? I'm still living into the answer of those questions. I'm still living that question. I don't know how my life's going to end. None of us do really. But I was fascinated. Well, how do great lives end then? And the Buddha said, being the sort of supreme life, as it were, fully expressed, how does his life end? And what I like about the ending of his life is that it really brings together two very different ways I've related to the Buddha. So his end, in a way, is really majestic. It's incredible. It's quite cosmic. Gods appear and all kinds of beings, human and non-beings, and it's like this kind of great, vast, image where all these people, all the beings, human and non-human, who he's helped, who's served, come to watch him pass. So you got this figure, and I thought I love those stories, and I also know that for a very long time I saw the Buddha as quite remote. It's almost like he's this being, almost godlike being, quite far away, a bit inaccessible. So I love the magic of it, and it also made him feel a bit inaccessible to me as well. So you got that aspect, that sort of cosmic, magical, mysterious aspect, but it sits right alongside him as a human being, as a man. Really, a man who knows how to live well, a man who loves and cares, who's free of craving. And as a result, free of craving, he's deeply able to dwell in this vibrant peace. So, he's a human being. He was a human being. So he has a body like us. The body does what it does. And towards the end of his life, he's suffering through his body. He says, just as a worn-out carriage can only be kept going by being held together with straps, so this body can only be kept going by being strapped up. So he's probably got all kinds of plasters and bandages or the equivalent in those days, keeping his body together. But then he says, but my mental and spiritual vigour is undiminished. He knows he's going to die. So he goes on a final farewell tour. And as he's going on this tour, he's expressing all the beauty for all the things he's seeing. He's really enjoying people coming to him, and he ordains people, he teaches, he's really giving all that he can, knowing that his days are numbered. And he's given a final meal by a blacksmith called Chunda, and unfortunately this final meal gives him dysentery. He knows the meal's poisoned, he eats it anyway, and he asks for the rest of it's buried. And then he says, because he knows that people might blame this man for giving him a meal that was not fit, and he says to him and to people around him, it's of great merit to give the Buddha his final meal, and he sort of rejoices in him. So his final resting place is called Kushanagara. And the Buddha wants that to be his final resting place. So he's already determined that's where he's going to spend his last days. Ananda, his attendant, is really unimpressed with the place. He wants it to be somewhere grand and fitting for the Buddha. And he says it was a miserable little town of wattle and daub in the back of beyond. But that's where the Buddha spent his last days. So he spends as much time connecting with as many people as possible, giving teachings, and when he's ready, he lies between two sal trees. And for me, I just imagine this scene that people are hearing now that this is it. He's found his final resting place. They come towards him. All people travel from all over to finally see the Buddha, to be with him in these last days before this great fire, this great sun, the light was extinguished. So, Anand is watching all this. Anand is watching all these people arrive. You've got the enlightened monastics and the enlightened householders who are standing there serene. You know, they're completely with the experience. They're paying great respect, but they are completely peaceful, completely calm. And then you've got a load of people who are just crying and distressed and saying, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? You know, the great sun's about to go. What are we going to do? How can we live without this being? So you've got this kind of audience, if you like, or this group in two halves. Ananda, who's not yet enlightened, finds it too much. He really struggles. And at one point he goes off and he's crying by the doorpost. And he says, alas, I remain but still a learner, one who has yet to work out his own perfection. And the master is about to pass away from me, he who is so kind. That's what he had to say about the Buddha. It wasn't what an amazing teacher, he does all this cosmic stuff every now and again. It was he who was so kind. The Buddha knows that Ananda is upset, so he calls Ananda. He says, go and tell someone to fetch Ananda. And he comes and he says, Ananda, enough. Do not let yourself be troubled. Have I not already told you that all things most dear and near and dear to us will one day be separated from us? But then, of course, he realizes Ananda does know that intellectually. He just hasn't fully realized that. But what the Buddha does next is really beautiful, because what he then does, he just rejoices in Ananda. He just tells him all his wonderful qualities and what difference Ananda has made to the Buddha, how he's cared for him, looked after him, or remembered all his teachings, shared them. He just says, you've made this huge difference to me, Ananda. Really, he just loves him. And at the end says, keep making effort. You will attain freedom. You will attain liberation. So he reassures him as well. And then the assembly is gathered. The assembly is gathered, and all these many, many people are there. And he just says, the Buddha says to them, is there anything else? Is there a teaching you haven't understood? Is there something you want clarified? Is there more that you want from me that will help you when I'm no longer here? And there is this noble silence. Nobody says a word. It's as if he's given everything. And, they know that. And they just respect the silence. There's nothing more to say. So he lies down between the two trees. And these two trees suddenly burst into unseasonal bloom. And flowers rain down on the Buddha. And he gives his final teaching, which goes, all conditioned things are impermanent. With mindfulness, strive on. He closes his eyes. He enters deeper states of consciousness and into what we call parinirvana. So in the tradition, you don't really say the Buddha's died, but more that he attained parinirvana, which means supreme enlightenment. So his body is no more, but the enlightenment force, if you like, the enlightenment stream is still very much alive. So for me, a life well lived ends in love, in generosity, in learning, and is complete. There's like nothing left over, nothing more to say, if you like, except the benefit for all those who are still left behind. And the Buddha's, left behind so much benefit that we're still gaining from. Right here on this retreat, we've been gaining from the Buddha. His benefits still being discovered today, within ourselves, amongst ourselves, and actually throughout the world. So that's what I think a life well lived and its end is. So thank you.